No, I think if you look at the momentum in terms of demand, corporate strength, that's sounding a lot like what we had last year at this time. In fact, you're seeing strong year-over-year growth on top of a very strong setup last year to come into the year. What's different is, I think, a little bit more of a recognition that there's a lot of policy volatility and anything can happen. So maybe a very cautious start in trying to forecast a full 12 months based on just what we're seeing so far in the year. So I would say overall revenue trends very strong, but maybe lessons learned and being a little bit more cautious on a full year outlook.
I also want to ask you, the Delta CEO said that demand from high-spending consumers continues to be strong, and that's something we've seen in a lot of the hospitality industry. He added, effectively, none of our growth in seats will be in the main cabin. They virtually all will be in the premium sector. Are airlines still losing money from economy passengers, people like me who are cheap and in the back of the plane? And at some point, are they going to run out of folks who can pay a premium for a better seat? What's the model here and what's going to work?
Hey, Christina, it's really, there's a lot of kind of revenue management here and premium passengers are flying, but the very price sensitive passengers are still not. There's probably too much supply in that market, and the fares are weak. And the interesting thing for the group is you are seeing capacity in that part of the market getting rationalized slowly. And so there's an opportunity here for another leg up as we get that market stabilized. But you are correct that the strength still is on the premium side, with the main cabin fare environment not as strong as premium.
Savi, I want to go to some comments that Delta's CEO Ed Bastian made on this morning's conference call. This is about the credit cards and the news that we got late last week from the president calling for a cap on credit card rates. Check out what he had to say.
One of the big issues and challenges with the potential order is the fact that it would actually restrict the lower end consumer from having access to any credit, not just what the interest rate they're paying, which would upend the whole credit card industry.
That was Delta CEO Ed Bastian on this morning's conference call with analysts. So a couple different things I want to talk to you about here is one, Delta, when you think of credit cards and airlines, Delta is the airline with the credit card. Help us understand the contribution that Delta's credit card has to top line to bottom line. What do we need to know?
Yeah, credit cards is really important, has become important for the airlines as a whole, and not just for Delta. It's most powerful for the big four, so the airlines with the kind of the biggest networks here. But even some of the the smaller airlines like Allegiant, JetBlue, the decisions are being made based on how much credit card contribution and what routes might appeal to credit cards. So it's really important. In the past, we've said at least 3 points of margin are coming from the credit card, probably more. And it's also important in terms of cash flow. It's a steady stream of cash flow. So when you do have demand volatility where suddenly some shock happens and people may not want to fly, you're still making charges on your credit card. So for airlines, it's also a nice stream of steadier revenue that comes through in volatile kind of passenger travel demand environment. So it is an important component for airlines and something we're watching closely.
Yeah, so it's interesting because he was talking about two different things there. One, he's talking about, which we've heard from a lot of the banks of late, which is access to credit and why it's important to have these products to extend credit to a large portion of the American population. If this were to go into effect, and there are a lot of skeptics out there, a lot of people saying this would never happen, but what would be more at risk for Delta? Would it be the actual passengers who would not be able to afford to travel and have this discretionary spend as a result of these caps? Or would it be that Delta wouldn't be able to make as much money with their credit product?
Given Delta's more premium and kind of higher end focus, I think for Delta, it might be a little bit more on just fewer people having this card. Because when you do get a card, you're more likely to spend with that airline. You're less likely to shop around because you do get benefits. So that's the aspect of it. And I would say this is probably going to be a lot more, to Ed Bastian's point, it's going to be a lot more impactful probably for the smaller airlines and for airlines that rely on a lot more price sensitive passengers that need that credit to make those trips.
Well, and speaking of those smaller airlines, we also wanted to ask you about, in other aviation news this week, on Sunday, Allegiant announced that it's buying Sun Country Airlines for $1.5 billion. They are kind of the other end of this market we were just talking about. They focus on lower income, middle income folks. They have a lot of small and medium markets, although this merger will allow them to reach more places. What are your thoughts on that merger? And is that what we're seeing in a lot of other industries, the hollowing out kind of the middle, where you're getting higher end and budget making a profit, but everything else in the middle is really struggling?
Yeah, Allegiant's really interesting, Christina, in the sense that this is an airline that focuses on, serving small markets to direct leisure. So Allegiant's definitely a lot more leisure and doesn't carry the corporate passenger that you might get on one of the big four airlines, but they still cater to a higher income net worth individual, because they do fly folks to their second homes and things like that. So they span the spectrum, and what I would say is I think what's happening here is airlines need, it's like any network. The bigger you are, there are scale benefits, and I think that's what the smaller airlines are figuring out, is they need to get bigger. The bigger you are, the more benefits there are to loyalty, to corporate credit cards and things like that. And so it's trying to get bigger and trying to get scale so they can compete with the big four. I think that's what you're seeing, and we think we'll see a lot more of that.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. That was my next question, is what other M&A do you think we're going to be seeing this year when it comes from, especially the smaller airlines? I mean, no question, I would imagine JetBlue, Spirit, Frontier are going to be trying to do some shopping.
Yeah, there's definitely, there's probably something more imminent with Spirit. We know that, given their kind of cash flow perspective and needing creditors to put more money in. So we'll get an answer there, if it's a matter of that they, have to do a Chapter 7 scenario, or they merge with like a Frontier. But you do see that kind of lower end or the smaller end of the market really needing to kind of consolidate and get bigger so that they're stronger to kind of compete with. JetBlue, they have a lot of cash, but they also have a lot of debt. So we'll see what happens with them. They have a strong standalone plan that they're executing, and it will all depend on, if we get a stable demand environment, and if we can see some earnings and balance sheets improve here in 2026.
The thing, this might be a stupid question, but the thing that struck me about this is it wasn't necessarily a bad Q4 report. It just wasn't as good as it could have been. I'm wondering if, at the moment, given all the constraints on the industry, given how expensive it is to operate these planes, to fly these days, is status quo, is maintaining altitude kind of as good as it's getting right now for a lot of these big airlines?
I think if you look at the fourth quarter, there was a lot of noise. It clearly got impacted by the government shutdown, and more so from the DOT directed flight cuts. And then you did have, weather towards the end of the year as well that hurt things. But fourth quarter, actually, Delta came in above expectations. So it was a good hit. And then what I would say is, if you look at the revenue, as I mentioned earlier, the demand momentum, the revenue momentum is really strong. We thought we had really tough comps because of the kind of the post-election euphoria that we saw in the prior year. But they're showing revenue growth on top of that. They're showing fare growth on top of that. So it is a really strong setup. I think what disappointed is investors were anticipating a strong setup, and they were expecting a really strong guide. And I think Delta is being cautious here and saying, look, there's a lot of the year to go. We're still 2 weeks in, so let's be a little bit more cautious in setting expectations so that we don't have to cut guidance like we did last year.
We're going to do one more. I got one more question for you, and then we have to wrap. Savi, I want to ask about moving forward to like United Airlines, American Airlines, and what Delta can tell us about what to expect from those other companies set to report soon.
Yeah, I think we'll get quite a few. I think that generally what the read-through here is the revenue environment and outlook is going to be positive. I think United has historically, talked about putting a few acts of God into their outlook. I think you'll get some conservatism in the outlook from the onset there. But generally, I think you're going to hear something similar from a revenue perspective, that there's kind of good momentum to begin the year with. And kind of, especially what we're seeing from the industry is good capacity discipline. And that's what we'll watch from United and American as well, is what are their capacity growth plans? Because Delta's 3% is very encouraging. And so what those airlines say about capacity growth will be also important to at least understand that supply is not going to be the issue this year.